Hello, class. So we are officially on week 12. For this week, you have two literary, theoretical, sorry, two literary concepts or lenses. So feminist theory and new historicism. And I want to talk a little bit about how that applies to dreaming in Cuban. So, feminist criticism, really focuses on the positionality of a woman and or female's perspective. So it's looking at the world through the perspective or the experiences of women, focusing on how misogyny and patriarchy impacts the experience of women and girls in society. So, feminist criticism looks looks at literature through the interpretation of that perspective. And there's some different waves of feminism. We have the first wave, which is like the Mary Wollstonecrafts, the vindication of the rights of women, where she talks about, the right to education, the right to take space in public spaces. You have the second wave feminism, which is more centered around, civil rights. Some of the icons that led, choice, that basically, legislated a lot of rights for women come from this period. And then you have third wave feminism, which is more kind of includes kind of like the intersectional identities of women, so race, class, and gender. It expands that perspective. It also like is inclusive of sexual orientation, of religion, and we have some heavy hitters, coming out of third wave feminism. So like Alice Walker, Bell Hooks, right? All this literature comes out of a third wave feminism. And, here are some really good questions, right, that will can help not just with completing the semester, but also like looking at the novel. If you choose to Dreaming in Cuban by Garcia Garcia, if you choose to analyze the book through a feminist lens, through a feminist perspective. So that's one of the theoretical frameworks we're going to be looking at this week. The second theoretical framework we're going to be looking at this week is new historicism criticism. And essentially, new historicism is a way of looking at literature or what you read through the lens of how history or that specific historical moment impacts your interpretation of the literature. So this is an extension of structuralist and post-structuralist. And I want you to think about these questions right here, right? Like especially in Dreaming in Cuban, where there was this specific moment in Cuban history that had a ripple effect in international history as well, and had this like kind of domino effect. And even in in the United States, we all know about the Bay of Pigs, and you know it wasn't something that was isolated to Cuba. It wasn't something that was isolated to one geographical location, but it had large worldwide effects. New historicism, I want you to think about how it pops up in the novel. You know that there's a historical moment that kind of helps move the plot along. And I also want you to think about this idea that this historical moment and what happened and the aftermath of it is being told, right? Or it's being witnessed through the perspective of three generations of women, right? There's the mother, there's the daughter, and there's the granddaughter. So looking at this historical moment through three different perspectives, right? Through this intersectional experience of age, class, and gender, and even immigration status, right? How does this impact your interpretation of the literature? In a couple of earlier videos, Cristina Garcia also talks about how policy and the political turmoil in Cuba impacted her writing as well, as kind of like a world, like a nomad, right? Who is trying to understand and wrap her mind around the fact that There's this public master narrative of what happened in history, which is commonly found in history books, right? But then there's there are these other narratives that most of us don't get to hear. So giving these three women an opportunity to testify, right, on how history has impacted their experience in their own country, in their native land, and also in their immigration experience, right, through Pilar and Lourdes. You know that history plays a really big role, and how history is told is very unique to where you place in society and how that moment in history impacts your lived experience. So these are some questions that you can ask if you choose to evaluate the novel through a historicism perspective. These are some of the questions that you can ask as you go through the novel. Um, let's see, what else do we have due here? We have a discussion. The discussion asks you, how does the portrayal of women in a given historical period influence our modern understanding of gender roles in literature? You can use so many different examples of this. You know, you can use a doll's house if you wanted to go back and use that to evaluate your for this question. You can also use a girl walks home alone at night, because that representation of the nameless vampire. I would say that her story is particularly unique because of who directed the film. And you know that vampire is very different from the vampire in Bram Stoker's Dracula, right? The way that she is portrayed, depending on who is telling, who's telling the story. And if you do some more research on A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, you'll know that it is very influenced. Some of the messages embedded in the film is very influenced by what was happening in Iran at the time. So there is some political and historical context to the film and to the interpretation of the nameless vampire. Um, let's see what else is coming up. Yeah, so that's pretty much, week 12. And if you haven't started working on reading the novel, it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to, do a good job on the gays and dreaming in Cuban and in the discussion on historicism and feminism. So make sure that you're thinking about how these theoretical lenses apply to the actual novel, because that'll give you a focal point of where and how to get started. Again, my Zoom link and my office hours are on the syllabus. You also have access to a tutor on campus. Tutoring is also offered over Penji, over Zoom. So just know that you have resources for this, and if there's a lecture video you want me to make, just let me know.